Imagine living in a peaceful community. Maybe you're even raising your kids there, You think you know your neighbors. But what if one of them is living this, like, totally secret life, one hidden in darkness?
Yeah, it's a chilling thought.
It is. And that's the reality that people in Oak Beach, Long Island, had to face with the Long Island serial killer.
It really is a case that, makes you realize that evil can be lurking anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. And in this deep dive, we're going to go deep into this mystery, the disappearances, the victims, and the arrest that finally, after over a decade, brought a name and a face to this nightmare.
And what's so interesting about this case is that it didn't start with finding the bodies. It all started with a 911 call.
From Shannon Gilbert.
Exactly.
And that call, it's terrifying.
It is.
She's whispering, she's saying things like, they're trying to kill me, but she won't say where she is or who she's with.
So scary. You can just hear the desperation in her voice.
It's a chilling start to this whole thing.
It really is. And even though Shannon's disappearance led investigators to the bodies at Gilgo Beach, her case is still unsolved.
Wow. So to give everyone some background, Shannon was an escort. She was supposed to meet a client, Joseph Brewer, at his house in Oak Beach.
Right.
Her boyfriend at the time, Alex Diaz, drove her there. But a few hours later, things got really weird.
Yeah, Brewer ends up, banging on Diaz's car window.
Really?
Yeah. Shannon's acting crazy, and he needs help getting her out of his house.
So he's basically trying to kick her out.
Pretty much.
That's strange. Do we know what happened in there?
We don't know for sure, but we do know that Diaz found Shannon hiding behind a couch, super upset.
She had already called 911 by that
She
point.
had, whispering that someone was trying to kill her. But she couldn't or wouldn't say who or where.
It's like she was in danger, but couldn't say it out loud.
Yeah, or maybe she was afraid of what would happen if she did.
Makes sense, especially given, the kind of work she did. But she was scared enough to run. She took off out of Brewer's place right into the darkness.
Still on the phone with 911.
And she ends up knocking on doors, begging for help. But she'd run away before anyone could really figure out what was going on.
Right.
Like she's in some nightmare, running from something we can't see.
Exactly.
One guy, Gustav Coletti, actually tried to calm her down, but she ran off again when she saw Diaz's car coming back.
Almost like she was afraid of him, too.
Adds a whole other layer to this, right?
Yeah.
Was she running from Brewer, from Diaz, or someone else entirely?
It's a question we might never know the answer to.
And then she disappears. No phone, no purse, no trace.
Gone.
Diaz said he looked for her a bit, but then left. Figured she'd find her way home.
Doesn't seem like the most caring response, considering the circumstances.
No, it doesn't. But the police did question both Diaz and Brewer extensively.
Right, and both denied any involvement, even though they were definitely suspects.
They both passed polygraphs.
They did. But the mystery of what happened that night in Oak Beach is still there.
For Shannon's family, this was just the start of a long, painful wait for answers.
Oh, absolutely.
They searched, put up posters, begged the police to do more.
Completely understandable. Just imagine the pain of not knowing what happened to someone you love, stuck in limbo, hoping they'll just come back.
Heartbreaking. And sadly, it's something many families of missing people go through.
You're right.
And it feels like because Shannon was an escort, maybe her case wasn't taken as seriously.
It's a sad reality, but sometimes the type of work someone does can affect how their case is handled.
But her family didn't let her be forgotten.
No, they kept pushing, kept the pressure on.
And that led to a major change in the case.
A year later, in December of 2010,
A detective, John Malia, and his canine Blue were brought in.
Blue was this amazing scent tracker. They thought maybe he could find Shannon.
Give her family some closure?
Yeah,
Must have been so intense following Blue, thinking they were about to find her.
absolutely.
But what they found was not what they expected.
Not at all.
It was way worse.
During a training exercise, Blue caught a scent.
Along Ocean Parkway, not far from where Shannon disappeared.
Right.
But instead of Shannon, they found a skeleton.
Wrapped in burlap, hidden in the tall grass.
This was not Shannon Gilbert.
No.
This was the beginning of something much bigger, much more terrifying.
This was a serial killer.
And Oak Beach was about to become national news, but for all the wrong reasons.
The nightmare was just beginning.
And as they searched, they found more bodies. Young women.
Most of them escorts. All along Ocean Parkway.
The first one they identified was Maureen Brainerd Barnes,
25 years old.
a mother of two, from Connecticut.
She came to New York for work. To support her kids.
And she just vanished. Her family didn't know what happened for years.
It's unimaginable.
It is. It breaks your heart to think about those families. Years not knowing all those questions.
Absolutely.
And with Maureen, like so many of the victims, she was an escort.
Yeah.
It made her vulnerable. It made her disappear into a world where people they just don't want to see.
It's true. The stigma surrounding sex work can really silence the stories of these women.
Right. Makes them easier targets.
Yeah.
And it makes it harder to get justice when they're gone.
It's like their lives are valued less, like their disappearances don't matter as much.
And in this case, it feels like the killer knew that. He was using that vulnerability against them. Picking women who were, like, on the edges of society.
Yeah.
Women who wouldn't be missed right away.
It's a pattern you see a lot with serial killers. They choose victims who are less likely to have people looking for them.
Terrifying to think about. But we can't forget, these women, they were people. They had lives, they had dreams. People loved them.
Absolutely. And as they investigated, the stories of these women started to come out.
Each one just a reminder of how awful this was.
Exactly.
One of those stories, what most people know, is Melissa Barthelme's.
Right.
She was only 24, vanished from her Bronx apartment.
Just gone.
She told her friends she was meeting a client, and that was the last anyone saw her.
It's scary how often that happens.
And what's so disturbing about her case is that her family started getting these calls.
From someone claiming to be her killer.
Imagine that terror. Knowing your loved one is gone, and then this person, this monster, is mocking you with it.
The caller used Melissa's own phone.
No way.
Yeah, they would call her younger sister Amanda,
Awful.
torturing her with these horrible details.
Just unimaginable cruelty.
But those calls, as bad as they were, gave investigators something to work with.
A lead.
They traced the calls back to burner phones.
Disposable ones.
Right. And they were all bought near where the bodies were found.
So he was covering his tracks,
Trying to.
using burner phones, targeting these women. But he also wanted to inflict pain, right? He liked having that power over the families.
That control, it's definitely a part of it for a lot of serial killers. It's not just about the killing, it's about the terror leading up to it, the suffering they cause even after.
Another victim was Megan Waterman, just 22.
So young.
She came from Maine to New York for escort work.
To make money to support her daughter. She was a young mom.
It shows how dangerous this world can be. Poverty, desperation, it can push women into these situations that are just so risky.
Exactly.
And then there's Amber Costello.
She was the fourth victim in what they called the Gilgo Beach Four.
She had had a tough life, addiction, trauma, but she had people who loved her.
She had a sister, Kim, who fought so hard to keep her memory alive, to get justice.
And Amber was trying to turn her life around. It reminds us that each of these women, they were more than just how they died. They were real people.
They were.
The investigation kept going, and more bodies were found.
This is just awful.
Jessica Taylor, they found her torso years earlier, but only identified her later.
Right.
Valerie Mack, they found her remains in different places, years apart.
And then there was Baby Doe and Jane Doe 3
A mother and daughter.
found together.
Just brutal.
The fact that some of these remains had been out there for years, it made it clear this killer had been doing this for a long time.
The fear in the community must have been incredible. Who was this guy? How many more victims were there?
It's a natural reaction.
For years, the case went cold.
Even with everyone working hard to solve it.
They had suspects, they had theories,
Yeah.
but the killer, he was just gone.
It happens sometimes.
But then, in 2022, they put together a new task force.
Experts from all over.
They wanted to finally close this case.
They had new technology, new ways of investigating.
And they started fresh, looked at everything again.
Went through the old files, talked to witnesses again, analyzed every little thing.
And there was something that came up again.
From Amber Costello's case,
Yeah.
a witness, they described a client who drove a Chevy Avalanche.
Okay.
And he looked distinctive. They said he was ogre-like. Big hair, big glasses.
So a specific look.
Yeah. And that detail, that was huge.
Really?
The task force used that description, along with cell phone data and other tools, to find people who matched.
People who drove that kind of truck.
Exactly. And that's how they got to Rex Hoyerman,
Rex Hoyerman,
an architect,
living in Massapequa Park,
Long Island,
married, kids,
successful career,
blended right in.
seemed totally normal,
But they thought he was hiding something awful.
a dark secret.
Hoyerman, he didn't seem like the type.
No, not at first glance.
But they kept digging, and what they found was really disturbing.
A lot of evidence was pointing to him.
Like what?
Well, they looked at his computer,
Uh-oh.
and he had all these searches. Disturbing stuff.
What kind of searches?
Torture, child pornography.
Oh, God.
And this is the worst part. He'd been searching about the Long Island serial killer case.
He was looking himself up.
Yeah, he was obsessed. Victims, their families, the investigation, he was following everything.
Like he was enjoying it?
Maybe. It's like he was trying to stay ahead of the police.
It's chilling. This guy living this double life, normal on the outside, but inside?
Full of darkness.
Right.
And it didn't stop there.
What else?
Hoyerman had used burner phones.
Like they suspected.
Exactly. To contact some of the victims.
He was being so careful.
Trying to. But then there was the DNA.
That's what really got him right.
It did. They found hairs on some of the victims.
Hairs?
Yeah, and they matched DNA from Hoyerman and his family.
His family.
There was one hair on the burlap they used to wrap Maureen Brainerd Barnes's body.
Oh.
Direct match to Hoyerman.
That's it then, isn't it?
Pretty much. You put that together with the phones, the searches, that witness description of the truck.
It all adds up.
Yeah.
So finally, in July of 2023, they arrested him.
Outside his office in Manhattan.
After all those years.
It must have been a shock for everyone. How could this average guy, a husband, a dad, be this monster?
It makes you realize Easel can look like anyone. He can be right next door.
Exactly. And even though they arrested him, this is just the beginning.
Right. The legal battle is just starting.
He's been charged with 3 of the Gilgo Beach 4 murders.
Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello.
But they think he could be responsible for a lot more.
Hoyerman says he's not guilty.
Right.
And his lawyers, they're going to fight it.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a while before we see justice for those women and their families.
Absolutely. These cases are complicated.
They are.
Yeah.
But it brings us back to that question,
About how someone seemingly normal could do such horrible things.
Yeah. I mean, you see pictures of Hoyerman,
Husband, father.
had a job, a house, seemed normal.
It's hard to believe, right?
It is. And
Yeah.
then you hear about the evidence, the searches he made online.
All that dark stuff.
It doesn't make sense.
It is a lot to process.
Ah.
And it's the chilling reality of serial killers. They often blend in perfectly, seem harmless.
Or even charming, right?
Exactly. But underneath, there's this whole disturbed way of thinking.
So what is that? Like, what makes a serial killer? What drives them to do these awful things?
Well, there's no one answer.
Right.
No single profile that fits everyone.
Okay, but are there things they have in common?
There are some patterns. A lot of times, there's trauma in their past.
Abuse?
Abuse, neglect, things like that.
So sad.
It is. And they might be fascinated by violence.
Not able to feel empathy for other people.
Right. They see power and control in a twisted way.
Like with those searches Hoyerman was doing.
The torture, the child pornography, all of that. It's disturbing.
It shows he was really into that dark stuff.
It does. Those kinds of fantasies, for some people, they can grow over time.
Become more real in their mind.
Exactly. And eventually, that can spill over into actual violence.
It's like he was living 2 lives. The successful architect, the family man.
Facade.
Yeah. But then this whole other side of him.
Full of these terrible thoughts.
And that makes it so hard to stop, right?
It does, because
Right.
the signs that can be so subtle, hidden, it's not always the creepy guy no one talks to. It can be anyone.
So what can we do? How do we stay safe? How do we even know what to look for?
That's the tough part. There are no easy answers. But being aware helps.
Aware of what?
Noticing red flags, trusting your gut feeling when something feels off, speaking up if something seems wrong.
Being cautious, but not like freaked out all the time.
Right. We have to live our lives, but we can still be smart about it.
And what about the victims? We can't forget about them or their families.
Absolutely not. We have to remember them, their stories.
Say their names.
Exactly. They were people. They mattered. And we have to challenge that stigma around sex work.
The one that makes those women invisible. Makes them targets.
It's important to talk about these things.
And we have to do something about the bigger problems too, right?
Absolutely. The things that make women vulnerable in the first place.
Poverty, addiction, lack of support, all of it.
We need a world where everyone feels safe, where they have what they need to get out of bad situations.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we finish up this deep dive, I'm relieved that they got Hoyerman.
But it's scary to know there might be others out there, hiding in plain sight.
That is the unsettling part. This case, it reminds us that this can happen anywhere.
We have to be careful, and we have to work together to protect each other.
Absolutely.
One last thought for everyone listening. As you go about your day, remember that everyone has a story, Be kind. Be aware. You never know what someone might be going through.
Great point. And remember, the more we know about these things, the better we can deal with them.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Long Island serial killer case. We'll keep you updated on Hoyerman's trial. Until then, stay safe, everyone.
And stay informed.